Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Falk, and thanks so much for watching today's program. And it's an important one because we're going to be talking about fentanyl. The message of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration is one pill can kill. Think of this. 2 milligrams of illicit fentanyl, that's really less than 5 grains of salt, are considered to be a lethal dose, about what you could put on the tip of this pen. The statistics are absolutely staggering. In 2021, 107,000 Americans died of drug poisoning, and 2/3 of these deaths involved synthetic opioids, usually fentanyl-laced prescription pills. Now, most health experts believe that these numbers are sadly understated. This program today is one of our series on fentanyl. And over the course of the last few weeks, we've talked with medical professionals, families whose children were poisoned by the drug, as well as police officials and drug counselors. And today we are joined by Eduardo Chávez. He's a special agent in charge of the Drug Enforcement Administration's Dallas Field Division. Eduardo, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, when I first started looking into this program, I realized just how little I knew and just what a horrible, horrible problem it is. Now, you've been working with the Drug Enforcement Administration since 2000.
2000.
Long time, my friend.
23 years.
Why is this different? Why is fentanyl different?
I think it's different in so many different ways, but the primary difference with this illicit drug compared to any other drug that I've dealt with, investigated in my career, is just the deadly amount and how little that deadly amount is to create essentially lifelong tragedy, not with just family members, but just with a community as a whole.
Now, I recently had some arthroscopic knee surgery, and afterwards I was reading in the folder that I received fentanyl. And
That's
I went,
right.
oh my goodness.
That's right.
But fentanyl is a prescription drug that is considered one of the most important prescription drugs that we have.
Correct. So fentanyl is what we call a Schedule II narcotic drug, meaning that there is legitimate medical use, but yet is highly addictive. So therefore, it's highly regulated within the medical community and with the DEA's diversion program, which is the overseer of medical registrants from pharmaceutical manufacturers to the neighborhood pharmacy. So for fentanyl, you will see it very commonplace in operating rooms. As you said, if you've been put under anesthesia, chances are you've probably received fentanyl. You may have even received fentanyl afterwards just to be able to edge that post-operative pain. Many times terminal illness patients,
It's used a lot with cancer patients in palliative care.
There's patches, that can be prescribed. But here is the biggest difference. In both situations, the operating room and the patches that someone might be prescribed, it's actually dosed in the microgram. So it is literally almost, microscopic amounts that is dosed to individuals over periods of time because of just how strong it is.
And when you talk about the strength and how little it takes to kill you, I don't think anybody can really imagine that until they see it. And so I'm holding this packet of sugar, and I want you to open it, if you will.
Sure.
And show our viewers how little it takes to kill somebody.
So this sugar packet, most sugar packets, just like you see at a restaurant tabletop or at a coffee bar, are 1 gram. This is a 1 gram sugar packet. That's 1,000 milligrams. So if this sugar packet were to be fentanyl, this has enough of the amount to kill 500 people in just this sugar packet alone. It's even just grains off of the tip of a pencil. It is too even hard to separate 2 milligrams out of the 1,000 that I just poured here. So when you look at that amount and you look at that pile, or you just go to your kitchen and pull out one of those sugar packets that's in the cupboard and think to yourself, if this were fentanyl,
how many people would die?
I have 500 lives in my hand should they take it and die.
The profit motive of fentanyl, that's the other thing, isn't it? It is very inexpensive to produce.
Right.
and relatively simple. Is that right?
Yep. So the fentanyl that we're talking about here, many times I call it the new F word, that we, are unfortunately is entering our living rooms. It's illicit fentanyl. It is not the fentanyl that is in the hospital or on the operating rooms. It is illicitly manufactured fentanyl. Primarily, a lot of it is coming from China.
The precursors are coming from China, right?
Both the precursors and the finished, just the raw white powdered fentanyl. And it's making its way primarily to Mexico, where Mexican drug trafficking organizations are pressing them into pills. And that is by far what we see here in the United States, are these pressed fentanyl pills that historically have been made to mimic very common pharmaceutical prescription drugs.
So, like, what type of drugs are they pressed into, as you would say?
So believe it or not, they're starting to expand, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But primarily, they used to mimic some of the narcotic painkillers that are available via prescription: oxycodone, hydrocodone, or the Percocet and the Vicodin. We have seen more and more them expanding into pharmaceutical lookalikes that don't match what they're used for.
And it's very hard to tell.
100%. So now we're actually seeing it in Adderall and Xanax. And you cannot tell just by looking at those drugs. You cannot tell. I've been doing this for 23 years. I cannot tell a fake pill with markings of what might be an oxycodone pill. That blue-green color, stamped M on one side, 30 on the other side, and a fentanyl pill that has been illicitly manufactured between the two. And with drug traffickers, again, primarily operating in Mexico, using the existing stamps that they might have to mimic the Adderall or the Xanax or the oxycodone, the existing color scheme that they might be comfortable with, whether it's white or yellow or maybe that blue-green color that is very common right now. And then it goes back to, if you're looking for an Adderall or a Xanax, and you're looking to get it outside of the confines of a medical prescription, and you do, and you find one, and it actually is a fentanyl pill, and you take it, and let's just say nothing happens other than the high that you're to get from illicit fentanyl. You are not going to care that originally you were hoping for an Adderall or a Xanax, because it was so highly addictive. You just want what you got the last time.
Got it.
And so drug trafficking organizations are capitalizing on that. The profit margin is 7+ figures with just perhaps a kilogram of raw fentanyl powder that arrives from China to Mexico can be purchased for as little as $3,000 to $5,000.
And compare that to heroin.
Compare that to heroin, being processed in Mexico right now is even less because of the influence that fentanyl has brought into this market. Fentanyl being synthetic, it is completely manufactured in a laboratory, in a warehouse, compared to heroin, that you need sun and water and harvest season for the opium poppies.
A lot riskier.
So it's a lot riskier, and it's a lot more labor intensive, and you have to rely on things that are potentially out of your control, like crops and the weather. So you introduce a synthetic like fentanyl, and you get just 1 kilogram from China, let's just say, and that costs you $5,000. That will press hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills that at the retail level here in North Texas, throughout the United States, averages as little as maybe $10 to as much as $30 per pill. Your profit margin is greater than anything you've seen compared to meth, cocaine, heroin. You add the fact that it is so small, the pills are very small, that I could have 50 pills in my hand right now and be able to walk around and no one would know the difference. It adds to the attractiveness for a criminal organization to capitalize on that and try to get hundreds of thousands of pills into our neighborhoods.
Now, you've helped me understand that it's highly addictive. But what is the high? Because is it not a sedative?
It is. So it's a low, right?
Right.
It's a low. It blocks the pain receptors, and in these doses that we are seeing, it just completely numbs the brain and body. so you just don't feel anything. And that's sometimes what people are looking for compared to methamphetamine that, would be a stimulant. It mimics a narcotic painkiller. However, the biggest difference is twofold. It's illicitly manufactured, meaning compared to the fentanyl that perhaps was prepared in order for you to have your surgery, the redundancy of testing and quality control is non-existent with these pills. There is no such thing as making sure that first pill is identical to the 10 millionth pill.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because I was reading about test strips, which are allowed in a number of states.
Sure.
Not allowed in the state of Texas, although the Texas House voted overwhelmingly in favor, but the bill still has not gone before the Texas Senate. Are test strips not reliable?
Test strips, there's good and bad.
And how do
right?
they work?
Anytime you can use something that, let me even back it up.
Okay.
If you are in a position where you have pills that you feel you need to test to determine whether they contain fentanyl or not, I guess I would ask the question, where'd you get those pills to begin with? And if they look like prescription medication, well, then I'd even ask the question of, did you actually obtain that from a legitimate doctor, under doctor's care, from a legitimate pharmacy? If the answers to all of that are no, because you purchased that on the street, there's a question there about just simply purchasing an illicit drug off the street to begin with. If you are struggling with a substance abuse disorder, or you're experimenting and you came across this pill and you want to be able to try it, but there's something in the back of your mind saying, I want to make sure it's not fentanyl, the test strips can provide a certain degree of comfort.
How do they work?
Many times there's different ones. There's some that it's almost just you just rub it on, rub it on whatever substance, you're about to test, and it will give you, a color change. Others, you dissolve a piece of perhaps the pill in some water, and you dip the test strip in, much like a pH test strip, and it would give you an indicator.
So let's talk some numbers. I think in 2021, 107,000 Americans died of drug overdose, drug poisoning, and what was it, 60% we think had from fentanyl.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And how many people are dying in Texas?
Even just from, you take a 12-month period from February of 22 to February of 23, and over 5,600 people have lost their lives to fentanyl.
And I'm not a mathematician, but I did cheat and read this morning that it's approximately 5 people a day.
That's correct. And here's the thing is how many of those, how many people succumb to some degree of overdose or poisoning, but were administered Narcan or other life-saving materials and actually survived, but yet no emergency medical service personnel were called.
Now I want to come back to Narcan in just a minute, but let me tell you about an experience I had yesterday. I was talking to a friend here in Dallas, Texas, and about this program, and he happens to have over 20 grandchildren. And I said, you really got to talk with him about it. And he looked at me and he says, my children don't do drugs. They are just straight and narrow. And I said, that doesn't matter. What would you have told him?
I have unfortunately had the opportunity to speak to dozens upon dozens of family members who have lost loved ones due to fentanyl. I would say I'm running at about half of them who tell me, my child, my loved one, my husband, my wife had a problem with illicit drugs. And this was just the next thing in their substance abuse disorder journey. I prayed for the day that it would never happen, but it's come. And I'm here to talk about it and help get through it. For just as many of those family members that I've talked to, I have talked to equally the same amount who are still in a little bit of just frozen shock because they didn't expect it. I spoke to an individual, he was 28 at the time, who had really dabbled in illicit prescription drugs, gone to heroin, had fentanyl, and was ultimately going away to prison because he was trafficking it. And I sat down with him, I said, how did it start? He says, look, I came from a middle-class, gated community neighborhood with two parents. My dad had given me an ATM card for gas, and I started with marijuana. I said, "Did your parents know?" And he says, "They did." He says, "But they thought it was a phase." He goes, "They thought it was a phase that I needed to try and needed just to grow out of." He was never in their wildest dreams. And this is him just speaking very freely in retrospect. Never in their wildest dreams did they think that I would have succumbed to not just prescription drugs, but heroin and now fentanyl pills. And a lot of it, I think, is because many of the generation that is raising kids now, us in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we grew up with a different set of what was illicit and recreational drugs. We had the frying pan with the egg, and this is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs, and McGruff the Crime Dog, and
Right.
DARE programs in schools. All very valid, all very appropriate for the time. But fentanyl has become a game changer.
Because one pill can kill.
One pill can kill. You cannot tell the difference. You cannot think you're going to take half and hope for that.
Now, you and I were talking a few minutes ago before we started recording about an athlete and who might just be in pain and has already received a prescription, and yet a friend says, or he says, "I'm still feeling that pain in my shoulder," and a friend says, "Here, take one of my pills."
Correct. I think the delivery method that illicit fentanyl has brought to our neighborhoods is very ingenious if it wouldn't be so deadly.
What do you mean by that?
It's a pill. We all grew up with pills. I bet you probably taught your kids, or your kids taught your grandkids, how to swallow a pill.
Very different than putting a needle in your arm.
Very different. And it doesn't trigger the same reaction as if I were to pull out of my pocket an ounce of methamphetamine or cocaine and set it right here on the table. To you and perhaps the audience, you'd look at it and you'd think, "Oh my gosh, is that really drugs? Is that real crystal meth?" If I were to do the same thing with just a handful of pills, it doesn't trigger that. It's very disarming. So back to your point. In the locker room, that shoulder's hurting after baseball practice, or that knee is hurting, and your teammate, your friend, says, "I've got some extra pills. These are really strong, but it'll help. Take half." You can't take that chance anymore. You can't take the chance on something that looks like a pill but can be equally, if not exponentially, more dangerous than a syringe loaded with heroin.
Are we making any progress? I know that in the state of Texas, they've allocated, I think, $10 million, which to me seems like a relatively small amount.
Sure.
But there's also here just recently the U.S. Senate is in the process of passing what's called the Fend Off Fentanyl Act. Are we doing enough?
I think we could always be doing more. I think from law enforcement to community organizations, from prevention organizations, the good thing is we're all talking about it, and we want to be able to talk about it more. We want to be able to educate more. At some point along our history, we got really good about telling our young children, in particular daughters, that when you go off to college or you're out, downtown at the neighborhood bars having drinks, don't leave your drink unattended.
Don't leave a soft drink even in the library.
Correct.
Right.
Don't take an open drink from somebody. And that seems to be a very almost widely recognized rule, sort of social rule. That's what this needs to become when it comes to pills, is unless you have a medication that was prescribed to you by your doctor and you obtained it from a pharmacy, you just no longer can take the chance that whoever is offering you a couple pills for your headache or that bum knee, or maybe, to help you relax after a bad breakup, or conversely to help you study and pull an all-nighter, something to keep you up to get through midterms. It's a game changer. You can no longer take that chance.
And you and I are new friends, but let's say that you offered me a pill. Well, I don't know where you got it.
That's it. And, historically, And we've seen, unfortunately, some national tragedies of celebrities and athletes and other notable people who have, perhaps, been able to obtain something like that, even though the fact that we're already doing something we shouldn't, right? Taking a potential prescription drug that doesn't belong to you. But then unintentionally took fentanyl and died because of that poisoning.
Is the situation getting better? Are you making any progress?
We're getting better from the education standpoint of what fentanyl is and what these pills are. I think what is changing is the consumer appetite for fentanyl. A majority of our investigations, I always use last Halloween, October of 22, as sort of a marker in my mind of when that started to change, when we heard of rainbow fentanyl. And there was...
What is that?
There was concerns. There was seizures of what was multicolored pills, from orange to pink to purple, but they still had the same markings.
Looks like Skittles.
That mimicked, but they mimicked pharmaceutical drugs. So they still had the same stamps as very common oxycodone and hydrocodones. For me, there was a large narrative that said, be careful with your trick-or-treat bags and your kids. For me, I took it as this is a moment where traffickers and criminal organizations are no longer needing to be as concerned with what these pills look like. And I'm no longer going to take these painstaking efforts to try and make it look like a prescription drug. And why? Because the consumers I'm selling it to don't care anymore. They know it's fentanyl. They know they're getting fentanyl. So regardless if it's polka dot or purple or that perfect blue-green color that would mimic a 30 milligram oxycodone, they don't care. And unfortunately, it's gone to prove accurate as our investigations continue, where many times we, through interviews, through just our investigative techniques, we find out that individuals are specifically asking, I want some fentanyl pills. I don't want a Percocet that you're going to try and convince me is real. I want a fentanyl pill.
But given the high percentage of people who are going to die from that, why aren't they hearing it? I mean, this is Russian roulette with two bullets.
It is. And I wish I could get into the minds of those struggling with that and the reasons why they want to engage in that risky behavior. But you could potentially use that even just for sticking a needle in your arm as well. I think some who perhaps have not succumbed to that, not succumbed to that chemical and physical addiction, they'd say, why would you ever do that? As far as the DEA is concerned, we are constantly looking at the highest level of offenders when it comes to the trafficking of that fentanyl. We want to be able to get somebody who is struggling with substance abuse help and education and put them in the right place for them to get resources to perhaps overcome that. But as far as DEA is concerned, we want to identify and tackle the networks that frankly many times don't even use the drugs themselves. I think it's a very simple message. Have a conversation. If you are sitting on your couch right now or at your kitchen table and you've got a young person upstairs or sitting a few feet away from you, perhaps maybe with their nose in their phone, maybe let's just have that conversation. Let's have that conversation about what is out there, about the fact that you can't take for granted somebody just offering you what you might think is just a Tylenol.
We talked about the test strips, but I've also read that almost everyone should carry Narcan, and certainly every bar or college dorm should have it. How effective is that?
It is tremendously effective. I mean, Narcan is a lifesaver. I have some in my car. We've had some of our agents that are getting gas at a local gas station that end up, saving a life because somebody may be overdosing. The biggest aspect of Narcan is that you can't screw it up. Yeah. Even if somebody is not overdosing.
That's an important point. Even if you see someone who's lying on the street, correct, and you don't know if they've overdosed, reach for the Narcan.
There's been instances where people have been unconscious, and unfortunately, you default to potentially.
Where do you get it?
It is now available over the counter. Many times there are people who, if they get a legitimate prescription for opioids, might be offered some. And also, there are a lot of websites, if you just actually search for free Narcan, a lot of organizations, a lot of community, nonprofit organizations offer that.
You know, something else that I think we should really talk about, and that is the role of social media. And I was reading that on Snapchat, that's where a lot of the dealers are finding their customers.
It goes back to anytime you're dealing with social media platforms that have some degree of anonymity or disappearing messages as part of their software platform, you will attract a criminal element to that. For me and for teenagers and young people, I just simply go back to having parents engaged in what they are doing and what they are seeing. And again, back to just a simple conversation.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the most important
You're
things.
doing incredible work, and I want to thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Rarely here on Perspectives Matter do we devote 3 programs to one topic, but this is such a critical problem for the United States, and it's something, as we've learned, that touches people of all socioeconomic backgrounds, and just underscoring what an issue it is. The Dallas Morning News has run about 30 stories on the crisis just here in North Texas. I want to encourage you to do what I did with my own children, and I have 6 grandchildren, is I asked my children to talk with their children about fentanyl. One pill can kill. And I think if all of us do that, perhaps we can save some lives. Again, thanks for watching and being a part of our program where we talk about things that matter with people who care. And I'll see you next time.